And that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. What a show we have got lined up for you today, because with the war in the Middle East still raging and tensions high on the streets of Britain, I'm going to be speaking to Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden. We're also going to get the view from the Labour Party with Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey, who's also going to be joining me on the show. Hot on the heels from selling out at the O2, you'll be able to see my exclusive interview with the Canadian psychologist and prominent Conservative thinker, Jordan Peterson. We touched on everything from Israel to multiculturalism to Boris to Rishi. We even spoke about Harry and Meghan, would you believe? And also, of course, what he makes of the Conservative Party. So it's a really interesting watch and you won't want to miss it. The COVID inquiry, of course, continues to make headlines after those very sweary sessions this week, featuring a certain Dominic Cummings. I'm going to be discussing all of that with veteran Tory David Davis and asking whether the inquiry is actually fit for purpose. And this is a story that really caught my eye this week. I'll be talking to the managing director of a security company that's taking the law into its own hands. With shoplifting in the UK on the rise, David McKelvey will tell me how he's managed to privately prosecute 300 thieves. So as I say, it's a jam-packed 90 minutes. You won't want to go anywhere. First of all, though, let's have a look at what's in the newspapers today. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is my GB News colleague and former Defence Secretary, Michael Portillo. Michael, doing a double shift this morning before your show at 11. Thank you very, very much for coming in. Let's get straight into it, because I spent most of last night looking at Twitter and seeing some of these scenes on the streets of London. There's still this debate raging over whether these pro-Palestinian marches are hate marches, as Suella Braverman has described. We've now discovered, thanks to the Sunday Telegraph, that a Met Police advisor led the "From the River to the Sea" chant. I mean, we're looking at some of these stories. There's a previous one about somebody who's been involved in the protests who's an NHS GP. If you've got a Met Police advisor leading "From the River to the Sea" chant, then you've probably got a problem with the Met Police, haven't you?
Do you remember we were all a bit surprised recently when the Met Police suddenly said that there were many meanings to the word "jihad"?
Yes.
And we thought, how on earth does the Met Police have this kind of knowledge, this kind of intellectual expertise? It now seems possibly that it has been advised by people that possibly the Met Police didn't know were also participating in marches, and not just participating, but participating very vocally and using this phrase, which is extremely offensive to Jewish people because they interpret it as meaning we're going to clear that area of Jews.
Yes. I think it's also significant to have a look at this debate that seems to be going on between particularly the Met Police, and we had Samart Rowley in the week saying that he didn't have enough powers to crack down on some of this extremist hate that we've witnessed in recent days. You've then got the government saying, no, you do have the powers, you're just not using them adequately, although there must be an admission that perhaps they could beef them up, because we understand from The Observer that Michael Gove is looking at trying to extend the hate crime laws to include anyone seen as undermining the UK. Now, do you think that there should be limits on peaceful protests, Michael, and what limits should be placed?
I think the story, by the way, refers to Michael Gove wanting to draft something like undermining UK democracy,
yes,
which I think is slightly different from undermining the UK.
Yeah.
And I think that is indeed a very arguable point. I mean, if people are trying to undermine what the state is all about, I mean, democracy is kind of the basic value of the United Kingdom, then there may be an argument for saying that that should be a definition of extremism. I think it's quite interesting the way that the story in The Observer appears to come about, which is by a civil service leak.
Yeah.
Clearly there is a debate going on. Civil servants are being asked by ministers to produce various drafts that can be debated. And I think rather preemptively, some civil servants are obviously against this move, have leaked it, trying to kill it. Let us just say that because we are a democracy, you know, any such definition would go through the House of Commons and would then go through the House of Lords and would be exhaustively debated. I mean,
yes,
this is not something which the government is going to produce as a decree or a fiat. No, no, no. This will have to be debated extensively. So I have some sympathy with the government on wanting to be precise about this. And by the way, it also says, and this is important, that there would be guidance about how that would be applied.
Yes.
Because the word of the law is one thing, but how you apply it is another. On this question of the powers, as I understand it, the Metropolitan Police does have the power to not give authority for a march to take place. I am rather gloomy about next weekend.
Yeah.
Many British people would be deeply offended if there were a violent protest, and these have the potential to be violent, over the armistice weekend. And we certainly can't have a situation where His Majesty the King turns up on Sunday at a cenotaph that has been daubed with graffiti or anything like that. So, I mean,
honestly, perish the thought that we're even contemplating that the cenotaph could be defaced.
At the very least, if the march goes ahead, at the very least, the cenotaph and much of Whitehall, I think, is going to have to be defended. And I'm afraid I can already see the kinds of scenes that we may witness next weekend.
So you're saying the police have the powers to stop this march. Rowley says they don't. So people are talking about, oh, should there be some emergency legislation to stop it? But you're saying that's not necessary if only the police would use the powers that they've got.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I briefly tried to inform myself on this question before I came on air. As I understand it, permission has to be given by the Metropolitan Police. But that's only the first stage of the thing, because even if permission is not given, it doesn't mean that thousands of people won't turn up.
Won't descend anyway.
Yeah. What it would mean is that the reaction of the police to those people turning up would be different if the march had not been authorised. But I mean, any of us can see the possibility that the cenotaph would be a target.
Yes.
And that will have to be defended. And I think, you know, one way or another, they're going to be ugly scenes.
Yeah.
And I think British people are going to be very upset. You know, to see the King go there on the Sunday, if there's been mayhem, even if it's in Trafalgar Square and Parliament Square, either end of Whitehall, it's going to be very upsetting.
Let's move on to how Keir Starmer defends himself from some of his own MPs who are now calling for a vote on a ceasefire. I mean, this is extraordinary because Keir Starmer isn't even in power and yet can't seem to sort of enforce collective responsibility, even though he's talking about matters for which he has no responsibility at all.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's very typical of the Labour Party. Actually, maybe it's typical of political parties to get themselves in such a twist over something that they cannot possibly influence. However, they are in such a twist. I have rather taken, maybe because I like taking contrary views, I've rather taken the opposite view on Keir Starmer and said to myself and to others, this looks like a real example of leadership, actually. Because at any moment he might have buckled. At any moment he might have said, I'm going to call for a ceasefire. I mean, calling for a ceasefire, unless you understand what it really means, doesn't sound like such a bad thing. It just sounds like you want to save human life.
Well, lots of people are calling for it because it makes them feel better on Twitter, seemingly.
I'm afraid I entirely agree with you. But anyway, Keir hasn't done that. He has taken...
He's been brave.
I think he's been very brave. And by the way, now I think he absolutely has to stick to it.
Because he has to hold the line.
A huge amount is now at stake for him.
Talking about things being at stake, in the Sunday Times there's a very stark warning from two people who know their onions when it comes to the economy. What are they saying? Who's saying what, Michael?
Oh, let me just think. This is John. Is he Johnny Diamond?
Larry Fink from the BlackRock investment group.
And Diamond.
From the JP Morgan.
Jamie Diamond. I got his name last. Jamie Diamond. Now, listen, I think this is a bit of an exaggeration. They're saying that things are the worst they've been since 1938. What they're referring to is the fear factor. Well, all right, yes, we are afraid. We're afraid about what's happening in the Middle East, and it could get a great deal worse. And economically speaking, we're afraid that that could put up energy prices and that inflation could continue. And if inflation continues, that means that interest rates would have to go up, and that means that the fear of recession is very, very marked. We also, you know, there's still Ukraine and Russia going on. Other things could start, including Taiwan.
Yes.
We've seen...
But a global recession as bad as 1938, is that overstated?
Well, I think what he was saying was that the political situation was the most dangerous since 1938. And that is where I do take issue, because if we're talking about fear, I mean, you didn't have this experience, but you had to live through the 60s to the 80s to know what fear was about. I mean, from time to time, we all thought we were going to be annihilated by nuclear war. And when, you know, Putin at the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war mentioned nuclear weapons, you know, that shudder went through us all again. But I would say, if you're trying to say this is the most terrifying situation since the 30s, that is an exaggeration. However, I mean, these people do know what they're talking about, economically speaking, and I'm afraid to say that the impact of the wars, particularly in the Middle East, on oil prices, therefore on inflation, therefore on interest rates, that doesn't look great. Doesn't
paint a pretty picture for the next few years. Let's look at the story on the front of the Mail on Sunday on the basis of Nadine Dorries' quite explosive book. Tory party covered up for serial rapist MP. What's happening here, Michael?
Who knows? I mean, this is really a deeply disturbing story. Not entirely clear to me whether this is a new story or a sort of continuation of something that's been around before. But, I mean, obviously, if someone is thought even possibly to have committed rapes against, they're talking about 5 victims, this is extraordinarily serious. And there does seem to be something in this story, in as much as it appears that Jake Berry, who was briefly the chairman of the Conservative Party, it appears that he worried that the party was not doing enough about it or the right things about it, wrote to the police, and there are extensive quotes from that letter.
Yes.
I haven't heard from Jake Berry this morning, but, you know, on the face of it, the letter looks genuine. It looks as if he did actually write that letter. So it'd be interesting to hear what he says. It'd be interesting to hear what Oliver Dowden...
I mean, the suggestion is of a cover-up that the party sort of sent this complainant to a private hospital and paid for her treatment rather than having a police investigation.
Yes. I mean, if she was not, of course, in a fit state to make a statement, if she needed treatment before making a statement, you know, there might be some defence along those lines. But that is very, very disturbing. And then let's just say that in the Nadine Dorries book,
that's an interesting slip, because it kind of is Boris's book in disguise.
Isn't it? It's the subplot. In the book, there are lurid other allegations. I don't know whether to repeat them, really.
Well,
anyway,
Sunday morning, but there are sexual allegations of a sexual nature.
One concerns a billiard table, one concerns a videotape.
Yeah.
These are the sorts of things that, you know, people used to talk about in Parliament, lurid stories that you could never quite put your finger on. And so I'm not quite sure whether this is kind of the rumour mill.
But it looks sleazy, and therefore it looks a little bit like a return to the 80s and 90s of Tory sleaze, which is slightly disturbing, isn't it?
Well, since I was around in those days, I would say...
I'm not associating that with you directly.
No, but I would say these accusations are a great deal worse.
Yeah,
I mean, I can't remember what it was all about the 80s and 90s, but I don't think it was about this.
No, that's right. Look, I'm going to be speaking to Oliver Dowden about this a bit later, because he was Tory party chairman before Jake Berry, so we'll try and find out whether he has any knowledge of this report. Let's just move on to another quite controversial Tory in Suella Braverman. Homeless tents, she says, are a lifestyle choice for many, according to the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Is homelessness a lifestyle choice, Michael, do you think?
I don't know, because I'm absolutely not in that field, and it's a very dangerous field in which to speak without expert knowledge. What I kind of remember from my time in government is that there are a number of people living on the streets that you try to persuade off the streets. You're trying to say, you know, there's a place tonight and a hostel, and you'd be much better off. You know, you can have a bath and you can have a bed, And these people might say to you, we do not want to go to the hospital.
Yes.
And that might be because they are fearful of the other inmates, that they think they're going to have their money stolen there or their possessions stolen there. It might be any number of things. But I think it is the case that there are some people that you're trying to persuade off the street and you cannot get them to go for whatever reasons they have. So maybe that's what she's referring to. At the other end of the scale, I do think the public, maybe the public is wrong here, but the public doesn't want to see places becoming completely run down.
No.
I mean, if you go to San Francisco, what has happened in San Francisco has destroyed the attraction of the city.
And she has cited that, Braverman. She said, we don't want to be turning into San Francisco. But I suppose my question is this woman a help or a hindrance to the Tory party? Because a lot of people watching and listening to this will probably agree with her on much of what she says. But sometimes her turn of phrase is so frank as to be unhelpful.
She's certainly a woman who attracts headlines and I think seeks to do so. And
because she wants to be the next Tory leader? Is this throwing red meat to the so-called righties?
I don't think I've even met her, so I'm probably not the person to answer that question. But what she does is she does one thing that a party wants, and that is to establish a divide between you and the other side.
Yes.
But the other thing that a party wants to do is to be on the middle ground, to attract people into the middle. And what Rishi does is he plays her a bit on a line, so that she does the bit where you divide society up and make sure that you get
attracts the criticism, keeps his powder dry.
And then he does the bit where you're trying to attract people onto the centre ground.
It's quite clever politics if you look at it like that, Michael, but I'm not sure whether it speaks much to a resolving of the civil war that constantly takes place in the Tory party. Perhaps we should conclude it there.
And we're quite a divided country, which is what we've been talking about with these marches and what may happen next week.
So divided country, you kind of do need a solid government and indeed an opposition that isn't tearing itself apart, one would think. Looking forward to your show at 11, Michael. Thank you for coming in early and speaking to me.
Pleasure.
Now, as I've just said to Michael there, coming up, I'm going to be quizzing the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. But first, here's the weather.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's a bit of a misty, murky start for some of us. Fog will be slow to clear in places, but it will eventually lift thanks to this westerly airflow that's going to start streaming its way in as low pressure drifts off to the east. This westerly airflow as well, though, pushing in showers for western districts, could be quite heavy at times with rumbles of thunder, maybe some hail as well. A few showers lingering across the eastern coast as well this morning, but into the afternoon it is going to be the east that stays driest with prolonged amounts of sunshine. Quite breezy around coastal areas of England and Wales, but temperatures further inland around 10-14 degrees Celsius, so fairly pleasant if you are in the sunnier spots. For any firework shows this evening, generally quite clear conditions further towards the east, but still catering for those showers in the west on and off throughout the night. A few though just pushing across the Channel Islands into southeast England as we head later on in the night as well. Underneath the starry skies though, temperatures will be dropping off quite a lot. Chilly for most of us, but particularly so for parts of eastern Scotland, northeast England, where a touch of frost is possible. And again, there will be some fog lingering throughout Monday morning. But generally on the whole, it is another east-west split on Monday. Showers continuing to push in from the west, heavy at times. Eastern areas largely dry, but we could see some eventually pushing their way into East Midlands, parts of southeast England as well. Temperatures once again 10-14 degrees Celsius, but a touch fresher where you're caught in the relatively breezy conditions. Showery once again on Tuesday, but more persistent rain arrives for Wednesday. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're waiting for Oliver Dowden to be mic'd up so I can speak to him from his position in central London. In the meantime, I just wanted to taste what we've got coming up on the show. You'll have no doubt heard on the channel me promoting my interview with Jordan Peterson. I spoke to him at the ARC conference in the week and it was a fascinating chat. We discussed Boris, we discussed Rishi, we discussed multiculturalism, we discussed cancel culture, transgenderism, the rights to protest and what's been going on in Israel and indeed the streets of London, anti-Semitism. We even discussed Harry and Meghan, so you'll be very interested to hear that interview, which we're going to be playing a little later on in the show. Also going to be speaking to John Healey. He's the man who wants to be the next Defence Secretary. Very interested to hear what he has got to say about the problem facing Keir Starmer right now, because he did this pretty punchy speech in the week where he showed a great deal of courage by effectively saying that he wasn't going to call for a ceasefire in Israel, despite, I think, now 17 of his own backbenchers and 250 councillors threatening resignation over the issue. But I would like to ask John Healey whether he can maintain that line and what he might want to do about defence spending. I'm also going to be speaking to David Davis about the COVID inquiry, which has made the headlines in the week. And indeed, I'm going to be speaking to the man who has been privately prosecuting shoplifters. He's been picking up where the police have left off in a bid to try and help shopkeepers who are losing hundreds and hundreds of pounds every week from shoplifting. Now, I think that we are ready now to speak to... we know we haven't got Oliver Dowden yet. Let's bring Michael Portillo into the conversation while we wait for Oliver Dowden. Michael, obviously I'm going to ask Mr Dowden about this situation involving this allegation that there may have been a Tory cover-up of a rape claim or a series of alleged rape claims. In general, this book by Nadine Dorries is speaking to what she claims is a cabal at the heart of Downing Street involving the likes of Michael Gove, a man called Dougie Smith, who's apparently the most powerful Tory we've never heard of. Doogie, in the Scottish, so he takes the Scottish pronunciation, Doogie. I mean, do you know Dougie Smith? Who is this guy?
Doogie Smith is married to Munir Mirza. Munir Mirza you've heard of, because she was a senior figure in Downing Street. And she resigned at a particular moment when she thought that Boris had said something outrageous about Keir Starmer. Do you remember that?
Yes, about Jimmy Savile.
About Jimmy Savile when he was at the Crown Prosecution Service. And Munir Mirza walked out at that time. Well, Doogie is her husband. He was certainly around in Tory party circles a long time ago. I don't know about his position. Nadine would not be the first witness that I would go to on
I know,
subject.
And people keep on saying, well, she's a fiction writer, so a lot of this smacks of conspiracy theories and a degree of kind of novelisation of what went on. However, she's also not the first person who has pointed to a cabal involving Michael Gove controlling things from within Number 10 and conspiring against Boris Johnson. I mean, it's no secret that this man knifed him in the back. He does seem to have enormous influence behind the scenes. And when it comes to Doogie, the suggestion is that this goes back years and years, and it was Doogie, Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings that helped to unseat Ian Duncan Smith as party leader. I mean, when you were around. Any truth in that, do you think, Michael?
I'd so much lost interest by then.
OK.
Before losing interest, I lost to Ian Duncan Smith.
Yes, of course. Yeah, this is a sensitive argument. Now, I think we might have Oliver Dowden with us now. I'm hoping that the Deputy Prime Minister can hear me and is joining us from central London as we speak. Mr Dowden, can you hear me? Thank you very, very much indeed for your time this morning. I've just been speaking to Michael Portillo about some of these allegations in the Mail on Sunday. I do need to ask you, because you were party chairman at the time, it's been suggested that the Tory party covered up a rape claim or several alleged rape claims, paid for a complainant to be sent to a private hospital rather than speak to the police. You were party chairman before Jake Berry wrote this letter alerting the authorities to what had gone on. What knowledge do you have of these events, Mr Dowden?
Well, first of all, I should factually clarify that I wasn't the immediate predecessor of Jake Berry. I don't recognise these reports, and it certainly wasn't the case when I was party chairman that there was any kind of cover-up. Indeed, I take exceptionally seriously these reports and allegations. First of all, they should be a matter for the police, but also there was an independent party complaints procedure. There can be zero tolerance of this kind of activity.
But did the party pay for the private hospital bill of a rape complainant?
Well, that's certainly not something that I signed off as chairman of the Conservative Party. I didn't have knowledge of that. I can't say for certain to you simply because I don't know the name of the complainants in question. I don't think it has, sorry, the name of the person whose fees have meant to have been paid by the party.
But I mean, surely there can't be that many people whose private hospital fees might have been paid by the party.
Well, as I say, I don't recognise this from my time as chairman of the Conservative Party, and I certainly didn't sign off something like that as chairman.
So you've got no knowledge of this. Do we think Nadine Dorries, your former Conservative colleague, is making it up, or there's no truth to it? Because we've got a letter from Jake Berry. It seems to have been quoted extensively in the Mail on Sunday.
Well, my understanding is, and I haven't read every last line of the report, that the person hasn't been named, but that's a matter for the Mail on Sunday, for Nadine Dorries and for others.
Well, the person might not have been named, but did it happen? This letter has been written by Jake Berry, your successor, suggesting that the Tory party has paid the private hospital bill of a rape complainant rather than necessarily sending her to the police station.
Well, all I can say to you is, as I've said, Camilla, I didn't sign off anything like that, and I don't recognise it myself.
So you don't have any knowledge of this having happened?
No, like I said, I was chairman of the Conservative Party. I did not sign off something like that.
Yeah, but did you have any knowledge of it having happened?
No, I'm sorry. Have I not made that clear to you?
No, so you don't have any knowledge of this story at all?
I don't know who the person is because they haven't been named, and I've also said to you that in respect of both a cover-up, I have zero knowledge of that, and we would not have covered up at all, and I certainly didn't sign off any kind of support in the way that has been described there.
OK. Let's move on to the controversy around this pro-Palestinian march on Armistice Day. Do you think this march should take place?
I have really grave concerns about this, and I think that certainly representing a large Jewish community as I do, but it's broader than the Jewish community. The Remembrance Sunday is about, and indeed Remembrance Day on the day this march is planned, is about remembering the sacrifice of previous generations, and is a solemn moment in our nation's history. And I don't personally feel that that would be appropriate. I also have concerns about the potential for violence and other misconduct. But in the end, the law of the land is that the police are operationally independent, and that's a decision for the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.
I know, but we've heard from Sir Mark Rowley in the week saying that he doesn't think he has adequate powers to stop the march. So if the government wants the march to be stopped, if polling suggests that the public want the march to be stopped, why doesn't a Conservative government stop the march?
Well, there's a very simple process in law. And indeed, it's happened before. It happened when Theresa May was Home Secretary, when there was an English Defence League march. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police applied for that march to be banned, and she provided the authority as Home Secretary. The law sets out that it is a matter for the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to request it of the Home Secretary. I think you've seen from the Home Secretary's comments where she's inclined to be on it. But that is the way that it works. That's how the law works.
So is Suella Braverman going to be saying to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner this week, you must stop this march? You have the powers, so can you stop it, please?
Well, I think you've seen from Suella's comments how grave her concerns are about it. And I think both in terms of the signal it sends about our society, our British society, we should be honouring and respecting the sacrifice made by previous generations. And you certainly shouldn't have the kind of intimidation that you see in those marches. And so I think her view is pretty clear on those points.
We know her views, we know your views, we know Rishi Sunak's views, but it's all talk and no action. Are you going to try and put influence on the Met Police Commissioner? If he says he has the powers or he needs the powers, either you say to him, you've got the powers, so can you please stop the march? Or you say, you don't have the powers, so we're going to introduce emergency legislation through the House as soon as the House gets back sitting after the King's speech to make sure that this march can be stopped on Saturday.
Well, there may be questions about that for the longer term, but the law as it stands is that it is for the Met to make that judgment. You've seen both the comments of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. I very strongly agree with that as well. I simply don't think this is appropriate. We've made that position clear to the Metropolitan Police, but ultimately we have to respect the operational independence of the police. That's how policing works in this country, and that's how the law is set out under Policing Acts and others going back, I think, to 1986.
You've quoted the Home Secretary there. Do you agree with her that homelessness is a lifestyle choice?
Well, I want to be in a position where we have zero rough sleeping, and to deal with that, we have to deal with both the push and the pull.
We all do, but is it a lifestyle choice?
Help people who find themselves in a position where they're No, if you just let me explain the position, deal with the factors that lead people onto the street, whether it's drug or alcohol addiction, and we've committed over £2 billion to addressing that. Now, if ultimately people are still on the streets after that, and we're having the kind of disruption that you've seen with these tents and all these other things, we don't want a situation where those spring up across the UK. So it's right to look at taking those powers, and that's what we're doing, and as part of our legislative considerations.
But is lifestyle choice the right way to refer to homelessness, Mr. Dowden?
Well, I think that ultimately, if there are other places you can go, and the government has made sure that there are safe places for people to go, and people continue to be on the street, then we should be able to take those powers to remove them. Each individual minister is going to choose their exact words, but I agree with the sentiment of what the Home Secretary is saying, which is let's make sure people aren't on the street in the first place, because we dealt with the underlying causes of it. If people are still choosing to be on the streets, I think the government should be able to take those powers, as indeed we had under the Vagrancy Act previously.
But should we be taking rough sleepers' tents away?
Well, I think you're talking about measures in extremis. What I would much rather our focus to be, and indeed our focus as a government has been, is about dealing with the underlying causes, dealing with drug addiction, helping people with alcohol addiction. But as an extremist power, it's something that is certainly worth exploring in the way that the Home Secretary described.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence, because you're quoted in a press release this morning talking about how we might see a future where we're seeing ministers handing over their red boxes to a bot. Should we be worried about these developments? I know there's been a few fears expressed at the AI summit that the Prime Minister hosted in the week with Elon Musk about people losing their jobs because of AI. Are we now saying that the bots are going to take over the running of government, Mr. Dowden?
Well, first of all, I think we should first of all see AI as an enormous opportunity, the potential to transform humanity, whether it's challenges like diagnosing cancer, Alzheimer's and so on. We do have to address the risks, and we made progress with that at the summit this week. I think government, though, should also adopt artificial intelligence. It shouldn't be the case that artificial intelligence is driving efficiency across the private sector and the government doesn't do the same thing ourselves. And that's what we're doing, whether it's in relation to assessing, say, benefit fraud or in helping with ministerial red boxes. And what that really means is there's huge amounts of information coming in, condensing that, getting to the facts of it, and then, of course, ministers make their decisions in the proper way.
Mr. Dowden, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Now, up next on the show, I'm going to be speaking to Shadow Defence Secretary Labour's John Healey, and you'll also be able to hear my exclusive interview with the renowned Canadian psychologist and Conservative thinker Jordan Peterson. But first, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
It's 10 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Met Police arrested 29 pro-Palestine protesters after tens of thousands demonstrated in central London yesterday. The force says arrests were made for offences including inciting racial hatred, other racially motivated crimes, and assaulting a police officer. They also said 4 police officers were injured when the fireworks were directed towards them by protesters in Trafalgar Square. Blasts were seen lighting up the sky in Gaza overnight as Israeli strikes pound the enclave. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says Israeli strikes killed multiple people in a refugee camp on Saturday night. Israel is yet to respond to these claims. UN reports say the average person in Gaza is surviving off 2 pieces of bread, and nowhere in the region is safe. Meanwhile, Antony Blinken continues his diplomatic mission as he heads to Turkey today. In a series of meetings with the US Secretary of State, Arab countries are demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Boris Johnson is visiting Israel in a show of solidarity. Australia's former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and the former Prime Minister are arriving this morning and were greeted by Israel's former ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. They will visit Israel's southern communities and meet Israeli soldiers. Later, Mr. Johnson is expected to meet with Israeli President Isaac Herzog. The Foreign Office is pressing for the Rafah crossing to reopen to allow UK nationals to escape Gaza. 112 people were expected to leave yesterday when the crossing was temporarily closed. It's unknown how many, if any, were able to make the journey. In a statement, a spokesman described the situation as disappointing and said they remain in contact with British nationals in the region. Meanwhile, IDF has confirmed a 4-hour evacuation window for Gaza civilians to move south. Israel Defense Forces confirmed the Salah al-Din road will be cleared between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. local time. That's 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. UK time. It comes as Israel continues its ground offensive. IDF released their latest footage of tanks and soldiers in Gaza as the land operation unfolds and a diplomatic stalemate of humanitarian ceasefire. And Prince William has arrived in Singapore to attend the 2023 Earthshot Prize ceremony. The Prince of Wales is hosting the United for Wildlife Global Summit in conjunction with his Earthshot environmental initiative. He hopes to shine a spotlight on Southeast Asia's role in the illegal wildlife trade. The Earthshot Awards on Tuesday will see 5 category winners presented with £1 million each to scale up their environmental ideas. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car and on your digital smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company on this Sunday morning. Now, I'm going to be joined by Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey in just a moment. Hot on the heels from selling out the O2 Arena, you'll be able to hear my exclusive interview with the Canadian psychologist and prominent Conservative thinker Jordan Peterson, author of 12 Rules for Life. We touched on everything from Israel and Hamas, multiculturalism, Harry and Meghan, what he makes of the British Conservative Party. It was a really interesting chat and you will not want to miss it, I promise you that. I'm also going to be getting some analysis of the COVID inquiry from David Davis. As a libertarian, I'll also be asking him whether pro-Palestinian protesters should be allowed to march on the cenotaph on Armistice Day. And this is a really good story that caught my eye. I'm going to be speaking to the guy who has privately prosecuted 300 shoplifters. But first, as promised, let's bring John Healey into the conversation now. He's the Shadow Defence Secretary. Mr. Healey, it's lovely to have you on the show. I think it's the first time we've spoken. So welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show, and nice to see you this morning. Now, Keir Starmer gave, I thought, a very confident and courageous speech in the week where he talked about the fact that he did not want to call for a ceasefire because he didn't think that was the right solution for Israel and indeed Gaza. But he's coming under increasing pressure, isn't he, from some of his own backbenchers. We've got 250 Labour councillors threatening to resign over this issue. It's very difficult for him to, I would say, enforce collective responsibility, even though he says himself that it's very important he does so in the party. How does he navigate this, Mr. Healey?
War is difficult, as you say. Keir Starmer made a very important speech. It was a speech of a leader. He was wanting to take people with him. He was making the big arguments. He said, look, I understand why people are calling for a ceasefire, but first and foremost, Israel has the right to self-defense. That means going after Hamas fighters and their missile systems and their command centers so that they can't pose the same terror risk to Israel again in the future. But secondly, there's a very strong practical argument. And he said, a ceasefire for now is not the right way because the best chance of getting what everybody wants to see, a reduction in the civilian casualties, an alleviation of the Palestinian suffering, is by working for humanitarian pauses. It's what the US is doing, it's what the European Union is doing, it's even the UN aid chief has called for the same, saying it's the only viable option. And so Keir Starmer was making a big issue to take people with him. And in the end, there is a single common concern in the Labour Party, which is to see the alleviation of Palestinian suffering, reduce the civilian deaths, and get more aid into Gaza.
I appreciate
that. Much more likely to achieve that through pauses, not as simply a call for ceasefire.
I appreciate that he is trying to keep the party together, but it's not working very well, Mr. Healey, is it? We read in the Mail on Sunday today that there are now some MPs calling for a vote on a ceasefire. So there's a significant rebellion going on within the Labour Party on this issue, isn't there?
There isn't a significant rebellion. There is a range of different views that Keir Starmer recognises. But Keir Starmer is not a protest leader. He's making the arguments of a national politician concerned to see the best way of achieving what is a common concern about the Palestinian suffering and loss of innocent lives. More steps need to be taken to protect those. And it's a leader who wants to take people with him. But in the end, collective responsibility, a degree of discipline is required.
OK, so if a degree of discipline is required, because you're obviously looking forward perhaps to leading the country after the next general election, you're going to have lots of matters of foreign affairs to deal with, and you're going to have a number of contrarians within your own party. So how should they be disciplined? If the likes of Claudia Webb keep up this campaign, which goes against what the Labour leader is saying, should she and others lose the whip?
Well, Claudia Webb is not a Labour MP at the moment. She's been suspended from the Labour Party and is under investigation. So, look, you know, I've been a Labour MP. I've been around a long time. I've seen and been a part of the Labour Party when it's been divided. And I have to tell you, if you go back 1 month at our Labour Party conference in Liverpool, that was a unified conference, totally determined and unified in solidarity with Ukraine, behind a plan to help people with the cost of living crisis, and a determination to get rid for this country of 13 years of a failing infighting government. And underneath the current difficulties and the differences of view over this heartbreaking conflict in Israel and Gaza is a Labour Party determined to give Britain a fresh fruit.
I know, but I suppose what I'm asking is, should others face losing the whip like Webb if they express similar sentiments on Palestine, which are not in accordance with the Labour leaders?
Well, Claudia Webb was nothing at all to do with...
I know, but she's also expressed some interesting views on the conflict. So I'm using her as an example for some on the hard left of the party. Should people who adopt that kind of stance, who go against the Labour Party, actually be disciplined by losing the whip? You've taken away the whip from a number of people, including Webb, MacDonald lately, Jeremy Corbyn and others. They're all of the same groupthink. Should other MPs that express these views against what the Labour Party leader is saying face similar discipline and sanction?
Look, Jeremy Corbyn is no longer a Labour MP either. The mainstream of Labour opinion is with Keir Starmer. I think the speech and the arguments he made last week will help reassure many others that our single common concern within Labour and more widely for people who are anguished by what we see on our TV screens and in the on social media is to see a reduction in civilian casualties, more aid going into Gaza, and more hostages out, and by that creating some sort of space and confidence that allows further diplomacy in the long run to try and settle this conflict.
Mr. Healey, I wondered if you might be perhaps more equivocal than, unequivocal rather than, say, Oliver Dowden was when I asked him this question earlier. Should this march on Armistice Day on Saturday be stopped, yes or no?
It will be utterly unacceptable if the march interferes with and disrespects the remembrance service at the Cenotaph.
So it should go ahead.
But we're in a democracy. So we're in a democracy. We have to balance the right of free speech and to protest. It's an operational decision for the police. They are talking to the protest organisers who want to show their solidarity with Palestinians. And they're looking at a different place in London at a time 2 hours after the remembrance service at the Cenotaph. And I hope we'll be able to get to a situation where we're not banning the right of protest, but we're absolutely ensuring that the remembrance, recognition and honour of those people who've served and fallen to defend us in this country is fully respected.
Why do you think that Keir Starmer seemingly felt the need to take off his poppy when he addressed the Muslim community of this country in a video? I've
absolutely no idea whether that's happened or not. If Keir Starmer was without a poppy at any stage in this present period, it will be because of something basic like having the wrong jacket or something fell out. So I'm not even sure that what you're telling me is correct, but Keir Starmer has a huge and deep respect for our armed forces. They keep us safe, and he knows, like I do, we've both served in government, that the first duty of any government is to keep the country safe and protect our citizens. And very soon after he became leader 3.5 years ago, he declared that never again will Labour go into an election not trusted on national security.
So you think it was more kind of by accident than design? Fair enough. Let me talk to you about your aspirations should you become the next...
Well, hang on. I've no idea whether what you're telling me is accurate or not.
Well, he appeared in a video addressing the Muslim community about Islamophobia, and he wasn't wearing a poppy, but moments earlier he was wearing a poppy for another event. I think the Labour leader has said that it was a jacket issue, but some have interpreted it as him feeling uncomfortable perhaps wearing a poppy while addressing the Muslim community. We just don't know. We haven't had much clarity on the issue.
Well, let me tell you again. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party has a deep respect for our armed forces. They embody the values that the British people value most: loyalty, integrity, service, courage. And Keir Starmer will be at the National Memorial Service and Remembrance Service at the Cenotaph on Sunday, paying our respects and honouring those who've served on behalf of the Labour Party.
OK. Mr Healey, a quick word on your housing policy, which you've released this morning. It's already come in for some criticism. I see that Peter Truscott, the head of Crest Nicholson, has said these plans are all well and good, but it's going to take 5 years for the first homes to be built. That's too long, isn't it, Mr Healey?
It won't take 5 years, but he is right that the house building level is in free fall. It's a direct function of the way that Rishi Sunak has caved into his backbenchers and given them a wholesale opt-out in some areas from build figures. So we can do, in the first 6 months of a new government, through a combination of new policy and new planning guidance, we can restore the mandatory housing numbers. We can ensure that all local authorities have plans, and that's the way you get more building, more houses built, but also the way that you get the infrastructure that's needed to support communities in the future. So we're in a hole. The government has no plans to fix that, and what we've been setting out today is the way that in 6 months of a new Labour government we can start to fix the problems that we've seen and the failings over the last 13 years of the Conservatives.
So, Mr Healey, you're saying that house building will go up under Labour. If we could have a quick yes-no answer to the following question, that would be great to conclude. Will defence spending go up under Labour?
Labour will always spend what's required on defence.
Will it go up, though?
Keeping this country safe. The last Labour year in government, we were spending 2.5% of our national income on defence. That's a level that the Tories have not matched or got anywhere close to in any of the following 13 years. OK. Mr Healey, thank you very much indeed for joining us for the first time on the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Now, don't go anywhere. Earlier in the week, I caught up with the famous Canadian psychologist and a big figure on the political right, and indeed on the internet, Jordan Peterson. We had a wide-ranging discussion on everything on how he thinks the British Conservatives are doing, to who he would like to see win the next presidential election in the US. You'll be able to hear all of that in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as I have said throughout the show, earlier this week I spoke to the Canadian clinical psychologist and conservative thinker, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who sold out the O2 Arena for a speech. Peterson is an international best-selling author. His 2018 self-help book, 12 Rules for Life, has sold more than 5 million copies worldwide. Many people, particularly young men, credit Peterson with helping them turn their lives around. But he's also attracted controversy, with many on the left accusing him of promoting toxic masculinity and even misogyny. Either way, he's built a wide and loyal following with millions of followers around the world on his social media platforms, and he's become an important figure on the right of international politics. The other good thing about him is if you ask him a question, he answers it pretty straight. I caught up with him earlier in the week before his speech. Thank you for your time today. You've spoken about trying to tilt the world towards heaven and away from hell. Life feels a bit hellish at the moment if you think about the war in Ukraine, recent events in Israel. We've had a lot of divisiveness on the streets of London in recent days and weeks. Do you think that there's a way of reversing the sort of tribalism associated with, say, identity politics?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're experimenting with how to do that on a large scale this week here in London. So at the conference that's occurring around us. And do I think it's possible to reverse it? I think it's always possible to reverse it. I mean, look, Russia dumped the Soviet Union, and maybe you're not very happy with Russia at the moment, but they did decide that that totalitarian experiment was inappropriate. We locked ourselves down miserably for 2 years, absolutely pointlessly, toying with totalitarianism, copying China, in essence, very rapidly. But we decided that maybe that wasn't such a good idea and backed off. And so I don't think things are ever set so miserably that there's no hope. So, and certainly I don't think that's the case with the world right now, because the horizon of opportunity that's in front of us is at least as vast as the horizon of catastrophe. And I would say vaster, because I think in the final analysis, good triumphs over evil. I think it's more powerful in the final analysis, that truth is more powerful than falsehood, virtually by definition.
Although we do live in this post-truth world. I mean, we've seen around some of the debate around Israel this week of people perpetuating falsehoods. We also live in this society now where the prevailing attitude is, if you don't agree with me, then you're not just wrong, but you're a bigot and a racist and deserve to be cancelled. So,
or worse.
Or worse. So I think there's a perception that Western governments particularly have been weak on woke. They've been weak on the so-called tolerants who are actually extremely intolerant. How does the silent majority cope with this?
Well, usually, often, too often, perhaps by putting their head in the sand. I mean, that's certainly the case in my country because it's taken multiple dismal turns for the worst in the last 8 years. But it's led, the Liberals there were led by a very charismatic leader who's extraordinarily narcissistic and who's used compassion. Look, if you're really narcissistic and manipulative, the best disguise is compassion. And you can get very good at acting that out. And if you're very good at it, it's very hard to stand against you because your constant excuse is, well, I'm just doing this for the good of someone else, and not only for the good of someone else, but for the good of the most oppressed and suffering. You know, when I first came to some political trouble, let's say in Canada in 2016, I spoke up against a bill that I thought was an unwarranted intrusion into the realm of free speech and free thought, which is what it was, but it was guised in the cloak of, well, we're just caring for the least of the lesser, who was in this case people confused about their sexuality and their gender, trans people, let's say, and the immediate accusation towards me was that I was hateful and a bigot. Well, it's, why did you choose this hill to die on? Why don't you care about these poor suffering people? Can't you just use the language that would make them feel better? And then if you are also, why are the governments weak on that sort of thing? Look, I talk to conservatives and classic liberals all over the Western world, individual by individual. And although this is starting to change to some degree, they were all terrified of being torn apart by the bloodthirsty mob, and no wonder.
But then that suggests that politicians may have lost their courage. And I'm wondering what your analysis is of Rishi Sunak's...
No, the mob just got more effective.
Well, maybe. But you've met with some Conservative MPs this week. I mean, has Rishi Sunak's Conservatism lost its way?
Well, he inherited a mess, to be fair. And how Boris Johnson got enticed down the net zero road is just beyond me. I think it probably had something to do with his young wife, But he swallowed hook, line, and sinker the apocalyptic narrative that implied that the only way forward into the future was to decimate poor people and to make energy more polluting and 10 times as expensive, which is rather a preposterous plan, as we can see by how it's laid itself out in the UK and even more stunningly in Germany. And poor Sunak's in a position where he has to go, that looks like it was a mistake, which isn't really a glorious vision of leadership. And I don't really know what he's supposed to do with that mess. Now, what he's been doing is rolling it back to some degree, and you might say perhaps not fast enough, and I suppose I would incline to agree with that, but by the same token, I'm glad I'm not in his shoes. What the conference here this week was designed to suggest, at least in part, was a broader vision than the mere vision of, oops, it looks like we made a mistake on the energy and environment front.
Although there are some Conservative voices, you've just touched on this in this interview, who feel like they are mooted. You hear Miriam Cates or Danny Kruger talk about the value of family, and then there are people waiting in the wings to clamp down on that. You're being sexist, you're being derogatory towards women by referencing their role in a family. You've been scapegoated by the left, some could argue, once described, I think, as, how was it, a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community.
That was a pretty good line, that one.
But what's your reaction to those sorts of criticisms, which must be very hurtful?
Well, they were hurtful for a good while, but after a while they just sort of became comical because they just got more and more absurd. Look, every category has an ideal at the center and a margin at the fringe. And if the center is destroyed, the margin will be demolished as well. Now, the radicals think that you can bring the margin to the center, but that's preposterous because a margin is a plurality. And if you bring the plurality to the center, you demolish everything. you demolish the category. Well, look, if you have the nuclear family as the minimal ideal, obviously you simultaneously exclude to some degree those people who aren't in that constellation. Now, so that brings up a real problem, which the leftists point out to, is like, how do you have a category, say with the family, that nuclear family as the minimal ideal, without being prejudiced against other people? And it's something like an informed and humble tolerance. You know, like, there's divorce in my immediate family, you know, and certainly in my extended family. My sister's been divorced, my brother's been divorced, my daughter's been divorced. Every family has people in it who are single or who are widowed or who are in gay relationships. I mean, the family is an ideal that's breached more than it's adhered to, but that doesn't mean you get to sacrifice the ideal. And the ones who are most vulnerable and victimized by the breakdown of the nuclear family are 100% children. It's plain and absolutely simple. Children without fathers, for example, do way worse. And that if the evidence that's been accrued on that side isn't convincing to you, then no evidence about anything ever would be convincing about anything.
Although the alternative view to that would be that you are stigmatizing single mothers by saying that, because actually you could have an extremely...
I am stigmatizing single mothers.
Is that a problem, though, if you have a strong and empowered woman who is bringing up a family in the absence of a father who actually maybe their absence is welcome, maybe the dad wasn't a good influence? You'd arguably be better off with the strong mother than two weak parents.
Well, there's obviously exceptional cases where the exception is the preferable alternative.
Yeah.
I've certainly had couples, for example, or people in my clinical practice for whom the divorce was clearly the right alternative. And they were married to people who were narcissistically psychopathic, who were making their lives absolute hell. But that doesn't mean that you get to escape from the ideal without the price of stigmatization. You can do a good job as a single mother, but that doesn't make it an ideal. Certainly not a societal ideal.
You mentioning narcissism again. Yeah. I mean, do we think that individualism has turned into narcissism and that there is a greater prevalence of narcissism in today's society?
Jean Twenge has made that case. She's quite a good social personality psychologist.
I mean, you've described Trudeau as a narcissist. Would you describe, for instance, Harry and Meghan as narcissists?
I have to tread lightly with such categorization, being a clinical psychologist.
Well,
you know, I'll leave myself to speculation. Well, Twenge is the best source on this, and she believes, and I think there's some truth in this, is that the hyper-emphasis, for example, on the development of self-esteem at all costs in the education system, which was a pathology generated by the faculties of education, you know, damn their hides, has produced a more a generation of young people who are tilted more in a narcissistic direction.
Can I just ask you about multiculturalism?
Yeah.
Because we have witnessed some extraordinary scenes on the streets of London.
Yeah.
We've had the call for an intifada from London to Gaza. We've got a huge amount of division at the moment between some sectors of the Muslim community and Jews.
Yeah.
We've seen an uplift in Islamophobia and in anti-Semitism in recent times. Does that suggest that multiculturalism has failed?
Well, there was no such thing as multicultural philosophy. It's so puerile and moralizing and unsophisticated that it's kind of a miracle of stupidity. I mean, first of all, we've always had a multicultural world. That's why there's been wars, right? So along with multiculturalism goes wars when the cultures don't get along. So what happens when you import that? Well, two things. You either import that under a unifying rubric, which would be something like the melting pot in the United States, or you retain the multicultural divisions. Okay, and you might say, well, we benefit from the diversity, which is arguably true. You know, I mean, when I came to London in the 1980s, I went to a reasonably good restaurant and I was fed canned spaghetti. You know, the food here was, to call it dismal was an absolute compliment. And so one of the benefits of multiculturalism has been a radical diversification, let's say, in cuisine, and that's a huge benefit. But if you think you can import multitude of cultures without a unifying rubric and not import the problem of interpersonal and social conflict, you're either blind or stupid or both. And both's a dreadful combination. So, like, on what basis does multiculturalism
become peace. You wave some magic wand and all of a sudden everybody gives up their cultural differences and can live in harmony. Harmony defined by what? Is there some unifying harmony? Well, if there's some unifying harmony, then multiculturalism isn't the solution. It's like unity through diversity, you know, peace through war. You know, it's a preposterous claim. It's foolish in its extreme. And then when there's tension, like there is in the world now, well, you see the rifts emerge. And why wouldn't they? Especially if you're telling people, you know, adhere to the dictates of your previous culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just...
A couple more quick questions, because I know we're pushed for time. Would a Biden or Trump administration next time round be better for the Western world?
I mean, if someone put a gun to my head, I'd pick Trump. If there was a gun to my head, track record. You know, no war under his administration, and he brought in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
Well, I would be pretty happy with another 4 years of no war and an extension of the Abraham Accords. Does that mean that Trump would be my preferred candidate? No. And I'm not pleased with Biden for a variety of reasons, not least, and this is something particularly salient at the moment, the Saudis, I believe, and I have reason to believe this, I believe they would have signed the Abraham Accords 2 years ago.
Yeah.
If Biden would have been willing to give Trump some credit. And I believe the Democrats didn't pursue Saudi Arabia at that point because it would have been inconvenient to give Trump credit. And so they isolated and alienated him when they could have given him some credit. He might have just ridden off into the sunset if he'd got some credit for what he had done. But they turned him into the monster they needed to fulmigate against, and now they have the monster back. And now we have the situation in Israel,
yes,
right, where Iran is using Hamas to agitate the Islamic world against Saudi Arabia, essentially. As far as I can tell, that's what's going on.
Yes.
So I'm not very happy with the Biden administration because of that. And I'm also not happy with the Democrat inability to deal with the woke left. You know, when the squad run by AOC was promoting the pro-Hamas demonstrations in New York, the White House spokeswoman did come out and denounce them. That was the first time in years, 6 years, and I've talked to many Democrats, where I actually saw the Democrats draw a line. I've asked 40 Democrats that I've talked to, some on my podcast, when does the left go too far? Not one of them would answer. Not one. Not even Robert Kennedy. He said, I'm not trying to run a divisive campaign. It's like, fair enough, you know, but you could draw a line between you and the communist psychopaths,
yes,
you know. So
that would be a good start.
Well, hey.
Final question. Which of your 12 rules for life do you think is the most important?
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Yeah, you know, if people are wondering, even people who labor under the burden of genuine oppression, if they're wondering what they can do to set the world right, one of the things you can do to set the world right that you could do is you could stop lying.
Stop lying. Good advice to our politicians, I think. That was the clinical psychologist and best-selling author Jordan Peterson speaking to me earlier in the week. You can watch an extended version of the interview on GB News' YouTube channel. Now, it's been a big week for the COVID inquiry. This week saw a particularly sweary session featuring Boris Johnson's former Chief of Staff, Dominic Cummings. But is the inquiry shedding more heat than light? And has it got its priorities right? I'm going to be joined by David Davis to discuss all of this in just a minute.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as promised, I'm joined now by top Tory, veteran Tory David Davis. He's the MP for Halton, Price and Howden. David, I wanted you to reflect first of all on the COVID inquiry. It made the headlines in the week, most notably for Dominic Cummings' fruity use of language. But are you, like me, a bit worried that this inquiry isn't going to really deliver the findings that we need? It seems to be obsessed with sort of the triviality of the infighting in Number 10 and not really answering any proper questions on our pandemic preparedness, whether we would be able to avoid a similar crisis in the future, and whether indeed the modelling that was relied upon for the decisions made around lockdown was accurate and should have been relied upon. Should we have taken a more Swedish approach? I haven't heard any of these answers yet. I don't know about you.
Well, the one person who's, I think, talked about it at all is Mark Woolhouse. It's the best evidence anywhere. And I recommend your viewers to look up Mr. Woolhouse, Woolhouse. He's a professor of epidemiology in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and he's actually very sensible. But you're dead right. I mean, this KC, I've forgotten his name, who's doing all the cross-questioning, is strong on theatre and completely absent on forensic analysis. I mean, he deals with witnesses really from a very polar point of view. He was very nice to the deputy cabinet secretary. He was ferocious in his questioning, if it was really questioning, of Cummings. Now, look, I am absolutely the least the last person in the world to be a fan of Dominic Cummings, but I don't think it was an intelligent cross-questioning at all. All it was about was his swearing. Well, frankly, what does that matter? I mean, all right, it makes great TV and it's fun to watch, but actually this inquiry is about stopping us making the same mistakes next time.
Yes.
I mean, inquiries always want to pass all the blame.
Yes.
And if you're going to do that, there's the wrong way to do it anyway. But it's about stopping it happening again, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of lives. That's what rides on this. And it's done not a single thing to actually advance that cause. You're right. Where's the analysis of the previous preparation? I was in cabinet when Operation Cygnus, I think it's called, was reported back on. It was a hopeless exercise. Only spent about 20 minutes in cabinet. I actually said, I think I was the only other cabinet minister other than Jeremy Hunt who spoke, and the Prime Minister. And I just said, we need to spend a whole day on this, not 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I know you're no fan of Boris Johnson, David, but at the same time, with such a lack of preparedness, wouldn't any Prime Minister have found themselves in a pickle when it came to actually handling this pandemic?
Yes, they would. There's no doubt about it, because nobody was prepared for it. The rest of the world was essentially copying China. I never thought I'd ever say those words.
Yeah.
Was essentially copying China. We very nearly, and if we'd gone on our sort of previous scientific advice, we very nearly followed the Swedish route. But we buckled, we panicked. For about 10 days, we panicked. And if I want to blame Boris for anything, it would be for that. It would be for letting his people panic. The truth is, a lot of this has been posed, by the way, as sort of lockdown versus nothing. And of course, that in itself is stupid. Because actually it's a whole range of options. You know, the Swedes didn't go on partying every day throughout COVID. They behaved with common sense.
Yes.
They stopped mass gatherings, you know, big sports events and whatever, and they made some of the same mistakes as us. But, you know, they went a common sense route. We could have sold that to the public. You know, the other argument, of course, has been put is, oh, well, we just followed the public, which is probably true. We could have sold the argument to the public, look, don't do this, don't do this. Let's just protect the elderly. Let's just protect the people in care homes. You know, that would be a good idea for a start. Let's make sure we do proper research and do what we did properly on, which was successful on vaccines and so on. There was a middle way in all this, and actually the middle way would probably have been worth tens of thousands of lives and millions of people's futures. I'm thinking of children and university students. None of that has surfaced in this.
No.
At all. Frankly, if it goes on like this, I'd cancel blasted inquiry. It really is not. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds, and it's not going to do anything.
And also, let's reflect on the fact that Sweden's inquiry is already concluded and lessons have been learned. Let's just move on to the Mail on Sunday. I don't know if you've seen it, David. Lots more allegations from Nadine Dorries. We've already heard from her talking about Michael Gove cabal bringing down IDS. You were obviously one of his opponents for the leadership in those days, so perhaps you've got a comment on whether that's true. Also, these quite serious allegations to suggest, quotes from the headlines, the Tory party covered up for serial rapist MP. Do we need an investigation? Oliver Dowden was party chairman at the time, claims no knowledge of this.
Yeah, all I have seen the headlines. I haven't read the actual article. But well, if there is serious evidence of a cover-up, then it should be exposed. There's no two ways about it. It's a rape case, isn't it? From what I heard, or an alleged case. Well, you know, there's no argument in the world that can support covering up such a thing if it's true. Now, I know literally zero about that. But obviously, if covering up a case like that is a criminal offence in its own right.
Yeah.
So it's probably a matter for the police, not for people.
Indeed. Let's ask you about something you do.
In terms of sort of plots.
Yes, plots. Michael Gove is bringing down leaders.
There's a part of me that sort of reacted, well, gosh, there's a political plot to bring down a Tory leader. Hold the front page. You know, of course there have been political plots to bring down leaders for as long as I can remember. When I was a student, Margaret Thatcher was working on bringing down Ted Heath. You know, and in that respect, in terms of what she has said about a plot against Duncan Smith, yeah, there was. I mean, I was his chairman at the time for a while, and then in his shadow cabinet as other things, and there was obviously a plot marshalled against him, and one or two of the names that she's mentioned were involved in that.
Doogie Smith.
So I think that. Yeah, he was one of them, I think.
Michael Gove?
He was famous for all sorts of other things, wild parties and so on.
Yes.
But the Gove, I don't know. Gove, I just don't know. He might well have been. I mean, it was quite an extended group. And bear in mind, it brought in Michael Howard as his replacement, and quite a lot of people who were involved in the sort of the Cameroon set were at the fringes. I don't know how much they drove it, but they're at the fringes. So it'll be when it comes out, it'll be an interesting read from that point of view. Now, the fact that these people may turn out to be serial plotters would be no surprise either.
What, Michael Gove? A serial plotter?
Well, he certainly. Boris would take that view of him after the way he treated Boris during Boris's first abortive run at the leadership. Of course, Gove was very famous for what he did there. But whether he was serially involved in all of them, I just don't know. But it's possible. It's possible. Look, Nadine's been closer to the centre of power than I have for a long time, and I'm not one of those who just dismiss her. She's a very intelligent lady. She's come from like me, from a lowly background. But she's a very intelligent lady. She's been very controversial at a time, very brave in some of her views. So I would read it seriously. I can't dismiss it at all.
One brief answer, please, from you, David, on the issue of this march on Armistice Day. Should it go ahead?
It can go ahead, but not through the cenotaph. I mean, it wants to start in Hyde Park, fine. It wants to go to the American Embassy, fine. Go over to Chelsea Bridge. It's as simple as that. And the police have the right and powers. There are acts of Parliament going back to 1986 right through to 2023, which give the government and police lots of powers to both injunct and control and put limits on this, and that's what they should do.
David Davis, clear as crystal as ever. Thank you very, very much for your contribution this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Now, we keep on hearing about a rise in shoplifting cases. This month, 88 retail bosses, including the heads of Tesco and Sainsbury's, wrote to the Home Office demanding action on shoplifting, which more than doubled in the past 3 years. So it really caught my attention this week when I read about a private company, TMI, that has taken the law into its own hands and privately prosecuted a prolific shoplifter after he mounted an overnight raid on an M&S store, stealing £500 worth of sirloin and T-bone steak and 20 bottles of Prosecco. It does beg the question how on earth he got that stuff out of the store. But anyway, since launching its anti-shoplifting task force, My Local Bobby, the company has privately prosecuted around 300 shoplifters. So to talk me through how it's been done, I'm joined now by David McKelvey, Managing Director of TMI. David, how have you done this? I mean, why have you been needed in the first place is probably the operative question.
I mean, we've been privately prosecuting people for about 12 years, but in relation to fake goods, counterfeit goods, that sort of stuff. And then about 3 years ago, our bobbies, who operate across London and the suburbs in various beats, were finding that they were being called on a daily basis to deal with retail crime, to deal with shoplifters. The issue was that the police were either not turning up very late, or when they turned up, nothing was then happening. So we looked at other opportunities as to how we could bring these people to justice. And so it was a natural transition to then prosecute shoplifters, I suppose, in cases where the police wouldn't do so.
Is it your feeling, David, that the police simply don't take shoplifting seriously enough?
I don't think it's a case they don't take shoplifting seriously enough. I think that resources do not allow them to do so. I mean, if you just look at what's going on now in London, they are stretched beyond belief. They're having to call in resources from outside of London to manage the difficulties they've got at the moment. And if you take a shoplifter, if you catch a shoplifter, you're tying up 2 police officers for potentially 16 hours off the streets for a £50 shoplifter. We do things a very different way, but we achieve the same success. We get people before a court, they get convicted, and they are sentenced appropriately, or they're given the help by the court to get past their drug addiction or their alcohol addictions.
Yeah, I mean, David, in your experience, are a lot of these shoplifters prolific criminals? Or we've had some talk in recent times about people opportunistically shoplifting because they're facing a cost of living crisis and can't afford, for instance, to buy baby milk for their children?
No, absolute rubbish. It's the stuff we deal with day in, day out, and we are at the coalface dealing with shoplifters on a daily basis. They are either organised criminal gangs who are stealing thousands and thousands of pounds worth of stuff across London and the UK, or alternatively, they have alcohol or drug addictions, which again is organised crime because they are then supplying that stuff to the handlers. Very, very rarely do we see people who are stealing, and if they do, they steal a sandwich or a cup of coffee, whatever. We're not, the retailers are not interested in those people.
But when we see these viral videos, and maybe they take place in America actually, but it could come here, of just people going into shops, loading up carrier bags, there's usually a security guard just watching it happen. Why isn't there more intervention? I mean, presumably we've heard from the head of Iceland that people are worried about being clobbered over the head or worse if they try and stop people in their path.
It happens daily. We see videos daily from all of the retail beats that we operate in. Shoplifters know full well that they can walk into certain stores, they can take whatever they'll literally clear shelves into bags in front of staff who will be standing there filming them in front of security officers. There is an issue here insofar as some of the retailers need to look at their internal policies. It's not just about security not getting involved. Potentially some of these security officers are told if you intervene, you will get sacked. But it's about the back end of that is, are the retailers going to then supply the CCTV and the witness statements to allow us or the police to prosecute? And there's a big issue with that at the moment.
But also, don't you think the retailers are thinking, is this going to be worth my while if I supply all this evidence to the police and nothing happens?
Something will happen. I mean, we on a daily basis, we're convicting people in court on a daily basis. The courts do take people, to take shoplifting seriously. We've seen people getting locked up, for 3 months, 6 months, a year. On top of that, the court is the only means by which you can enforce a drug addiction order or an alcohol sentence so that you can get these people help. It's the only way. You have to put these people before a court and you have to convict them and you have to get them the help they need or lock them away.
So you're talking about quite large-scale criminal gangs shoplifting from various different retailers as part of a kind of criminal conspiracy. I get that. People listening and watching this show, however, are sceptical about this. We're not going to look at anyone shoplifting under £200 worth of goods. I think the general public looks at that and says, well, basically, you're just giving people a licence to petty thieve. That's a cogent argument, isn't it, David?
Unfortunately, the government brought in a law in 2014 that effectively, I don't know if that's a word, it's decriminalised, but it made shoplifting under £200 a summary-only offence. That sent a message out. The message it sent out to police and the CPS was that anything under £200, is not really worth prosecuting. And all of the criminals know that. So you will see people going in and stealing, knowing that there is nothing going to happen to them, providing they stick below the £200 limit.
So should that £200 limit be taken away?
Yes.
Thank you for that succinct answer. And finally, David, I presume that applications or indeed demand for your services have gone up lately because shoplifting, as I said earlier, has more than doubled in the past year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've proven that old-fashioned policing still works. Every beat that we operate, retail beat, we have seen significant reductions in crime. And the most important thing around this is making people feel safe. Retailers in those areas feel safe. They know that they can go to work and do not risk being assaulted or being threatened or any violence towards them. That's the most important thing.
David McKelvey, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Keep up the good work. Good luck to all of the staff quite bravely working for your firm TMI. Well, there you had it. We can prosecute shoplifters if only we have the impetus and the intention. Now, it's been a fascinating show. Don't forget you can listen back to the Jordan Peterson interview in full on the GB News YouTube channel. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30, but up next it's my paper reviewer extraordinaire, Michael Portillo.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dowden tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on